He will turn the hearts of the fathers to the children and the hearts of the children to their fathers. And because homeschooling is doing that, it is absolutely a revival movement. You know, it took me back to that stadium in 1972 where there are 80,000 Christians. And I think, Lord, will I ever see anything else like that in my life? And now there are millions and millions and millions of people homeschooling.
Hi, welcome to the Zan Tyler podcast. This podcast is brought to you by BJU Press Homeschool. Homeschooling is an exciting adventure we take with our children. One of the most challenging parts of this journey is choosing the curriculum you want to use. BJU Press Homeschool is a curriculum you can trust. All the books, resources, and videos have been designed with you and your child in mind. Their curriculum is educationally robust and rich, taking into account that children have different learning styles, strengths, and needs. Mom, you are in charge. BJU Press Homeschool is here to come alongside and support you. Do you need help with the teaching load, or is there a subject you just don't want to teach? Their amazing video courses are available for all grades and almost every subject. BJU Press Homeschool believes that homeschooling can produce a new generation of students who know God, love their neighbors, and stand firm in their faith. For more information, go to bjupresshomeschool.com. That's bjupresshomeschool.com.
It is great to be here. I came to my first Apex, had that experience last year and loved it. So thanks for having me. I'm going to start just by telling you I am a mother and wife first, and so everything you see about my story has to be in context of that. Actually, I'm a grandmother now. This is my grandson on your left and his bestie, and they're involved in a homeschool basketball tournament. And so Brody was the same age I was when I'm starting to tell you the story that I want to tell you. So here's a little bit about our family. We started homeschooling in 1984. We had 3 kids. The boys were 9 and 7 when Lizzie was born. Here's a little bit, pictures of our whole family, which are a little blurry and hard to see, but it just gives you a feel maybe for what my life is like when I'm not on the speaking trail. And because we're talking about shift, some things don't change. And I don't know if you homeschool. Did everybody here homeschool? Raise your hand. Okay. So one of the first field trips we ever had in the homeschooling community, and this is the 80s, the early 80s, were homeschool skate days. So when my 2 grandkids had a homeschool skate day, I was the honorary guest because I had been attending the longest. And so this is my grandsons when they were 12 and 14. You can tell they get their height from me. And so this is just to show you how life goes full circle. This was August 31st of last year. Joe's dad died and went to be with the Lord when he was 100 years old. So can you imagine what he saw in that lifetime? Grew up on a farm during the Great Depression with 10 siblings, lost their farm, fought in World War II. He loved the Lord. It was amazing. And so as I talk to you from my perspective as a wife and mother and my story, I also want us to remember that life has an eternal perspective. And if we forget that, we've really forgotten the most important thing. And so, as I said, I was Brody's age. I was 16 as I get ready to tell you this story. If you have any friends who are homeschooling, your parents, friends of their parents, I have a homeschool podcast that I've enjoyed doing. And we appreciate today y'all letting me use this as part of my podcast. So when I was 16, I went to a public school. It was a new school. 3,500 students in South Carolina, and Friday Night Lights was a big deal. I was also a cheerleader, and I was also a new Christian. Now, I had grown up in the church, but Joe and I both, where is Joe? I don't know if I can see him for the lights. There's Joe. So we were both saved during the Jesus movement or the Jesus Revolution, and this was 1972. It was through Young Life. We're at a Young Life camp, and a Christian assistant principal in our high school who we had a real drug problem in the 1970s, and he started leading these druggy kids to the Lord actually by the hundreds over the next 2 or 3 years. And so I went to Charlie's Bible study once a week, and he was able to start this new program in the high school where they were going to have students give the invocation at the football games. And because I don't know why, I was the first one. And so I gave the invocation at a football game on Friday night, huge events. And I prayed as a believer, and I prayed in Jesus' name. I thank the Lord for Jesus. I just remember it like it was yesterday. So Monday in school, there's a message over the intercom system. Will Zan Peters please report to the principal's office? Well, I wasn't concerned because I was a top student and I was very involved in everything at the school. I just thought they needed help with a project. And so when I walk into the principal's office, there's a committee from the community. And the principal says to me, Zan, you offended a lot of people Friday night by the way you prayed, and they are here for an apology. Now, I'm 16 years old, 5 feet tall, and I'm hugely outnumbered in this room. And I looked at them, and the verse is true. When you're called before the authorities, the Holy Spirit will give you the words. And I'm trying to assess this. I mean, I've never been in trouble. I'm trying to find a grid for this. And finally I say, I am so sorry if I offended you, but I can't apologize for what I believe or what I said. And if I were given the opportunity, I'd do the same thing again. And we all just sat there. I thought, are they going to suspend me? What are they going to do? And finally, Dr. Hudgens said, Zan, why don't you just go back to your class and we'll discuss this later, which we never did. And I was very thankful for that. But the interesting thing about that story is I didn't know that morning when I woke up that God was going to ask me to make a stand for something. And it was a small stand, but it was a significant stand for me. And it was a hard place to be in. So there are a lot of mornings we wake up just anticipating it being another day in our lives. And yet the Lord may call you to take a stand that day. There were 2 other things that happened my junior year in high school that were very formative for what I did in the homeschooling community in terms of lobbying and starting organizations and that type of thing. And one was Explo 72, and the other was Girl State. So what in the world do those 2 things have in common? Have any of you heard of Explo 72? Okay, so during the Jesus movement, I'm going to fast forward and show you this picture. There was this is sort of the apex of the Jesus revolution. There were 80,000 kids who went to this conference in the Cotton Bowl at Dallas. And this is a picture, and I was there. And so enjoy and appreciate this community because it will really feed your soul and your convictions for the rest of your life. And that's really how Explo 72 was for me. And it was really important that I was there and that I saw this revival. 80,000 kids. Woodstock, which was the rock and roll version, had happened in 1969, 3 years earlier, with probably 300,000 or 400,000 people. It was just a drug and sex event. And at Explo 72, this cover in Time and Life magazine talked about how there were just no issues, no arrests, no nothing. And Girl State is a program a little bit like Teen Pact. It was mainly public school kids, some private school kids. It was sponsored by the American Legion, mock government. 2 girls, 2 boys from every high school in South Carolina were invited to come. And so I was chosen from my high school. It was a pretty big deal back in the day, and I was elected governor. I told my dad before Girl State started, I'm not going to Girl State because I want to go to Explo 72. And there's a conflict. So my dad moved heaven and earth. And as soon as I could leave Girl State on Friday, he flew me to meet a friend in Mississippi who took me to a bus station to meet the bus that my youth group was on, driving to Dallas. And so both of these things had great repercussions in my life. One of the most interesting things is my counselor at Girl State later became the superintendent of education in South Carolina. And so as we were going through a lot of turmoil, she was a friend. It was pretty amazing. Revival is important, and we're going to talk about this later. There was one guy who did research on Explo 72 and somehow got the list of people there from South Carolina, said that 60% of the people who attended were either in full-time Christian ministry or some type of Christian outreach because of that event. So we move on. I went to college. My young life leader was very concerned that I find community the minute I stepped on that campus. It was not a Christian school. And so he called the young life leader in Greenville, and they gave me Joe Tyler's name, and they gave Joe Zan Peter's name and said, y'all need to meet. You're going to be working in Young Life together, and you need Christian fellowship. So I met Joe the first week of college, and my life was never the same after that. It changed significantly. You can see we were a little bit younger then. One of us had a little bit more hair. One of us had a little fewer wrinkles. But we are coming up on 48 years of marriage, which I got. So it is truly something to celebrate. So Joe and I were really involved. We ended up not working in Young Life. Joe and we had a huge campus crusade there, 2,500 students on campus, probably 300 kids that went to Campus Crusade every Sunday night. Joe and Hal, his best friend, started a Bible study, that just went a little bit deeper. And we were a committed group of kids. We had prayer meetings at 5 o'clock in the morning. We shared our faith routinely and rigorously on campus. Joe and his buddy were in trouble for helping to start a Bible study group that taught freshmen Christian kids how to take Religion 11 and maintain your faith. And so those were interesting days to be a college student. So our junior year, so there are two things I'll tell you about me at this point. I'm 18 or 19 and a junior in college. And there are two things I said I would never do in life. One was teach, and the other was have kids. And so I'm so instructive in so many ways. Don't tell the Lord what your preferences are. Well, you can tell him your preferences. Just don't expect him to always bow to your preferences. And so our junior year in college, Joe proposed, and it shocked me. I mean, he was my best friend in the world, and I was so mad at him because he was ruining my life plan, and I didn't want to have to choose between going to law school after college because I had worked for this. I had always been career oriented, and choose between Joe, but he would not let me off the hook. And so it was really interesting. We're talking about shift here and change and community. We were in this tight community, and somebody gave me a copy of Elizabeth Elliot's book, Let Me Be a Woman. Do y'all know Elizabeth Elliot? Her husband was martyred, Jim Elliot, by the Auca Indians. She wrote this little book for her daughter, who was a year older than me and was getting married. And somebody gave me this book and said, Zan, you need to read this book. I read the back cover and I thought, oh, my life is never going to be the same again. So a friend of mine had a mountain house outside of Greenville, South Carolina, where I was in school. And I asked her if I could use it for the weekend. She said, sure. I took my Bible, I took my journal, and I fasted and prayed for the weekend because I didn't know how to cook. And so I had the weekend with the Lord and I read this book. And all of a sudden, I'm having this idea that I never had before, that God may have a different calling for me as a Christian woman. And I really struggled with that because I had put a lot of time and effort into my studies and my work and political involvement, all those types of things. And I felt like God was asking me to lay that all on the altar. Now, I have lots of friends who went to law school, and it was not because they ignored God, they were following God. This was what God was calling me to do. So I went up the mountain one person and really came down the mountain a different person. So I told Joe, yes, I do. Well, I wasn't sure still I really wanted to get married, but I knew that God was calling me there, and I knew that I couldn't live my life without Joe. There was always already a certain spiritual authority he had in my life. So we got married the year after I graduated. He still had a year of college left. And we went on to have, in the first 3 years we were married, instead of having a law degree, I had 2 boys. And I cannot imagine my life without Ty and John. So now I'm this stay-at-home mom, and I'm trying to figure out how to live my life in a calling that I never thought about, much less prepared for. Although our senior year in high school, Joe and I read, it was just the beginning of focus on the family and people, Christians, beginning to respond to the divorce rate and the sexual and the drug revolution and all these things in culture. And so we had done a lot of reading, but there's nothing like the experience of being married and having children to teach you life in the trenches. So we get to the point where Ty is now 6. He's finishing kindergarten. All 3 of my kids are the light of my life in so many ways. And he just had this brilliance about him. He had the it factor. He was a people person. Even then we knew he would either make his living preaching or selling, but it would be with his mouth and with people. And, but he was not reading like everybody else. Now, I had been very committed to not knowing anything about education, and so when he started having problems, I didn't know what to do. I asked a friend of mine who had her master's degree. She said, "Oh, just hold him back a year. That's what he needs." And we had a great church community, and I had just this little Bible study, and it was me and one of my very closest friends. She was a little bit older than I was. She had children younger. I was 28 at this point in time. And she said, "Zan, I'm going to homeschool Nat, and I think you should homeschool Ty. That would take care of his problems." Now, I have to tell you, this is 1984. I had never heard the word homeschooling in my life, much less thought about it. All I could think about was, this is the craziest, most backwoods thing I have ever heard. We're a family of extroverts. Susan's was a family of quieter people. I thought, Lord, I got to get out of here in a really nice way. And she hands me a book on the way out the door, Homegrown Kids by Dr. Raymond Moore. She said, "You need to read this." And I look at this and I get that feeling I had in college when somebody gave me Let Me Be a Woman. And I thought, I can't read this because I can tell this is going to change my life. So I get the boys, we get in the car, and this time I'm smarter and wiser, and I take the offensive with God. Okay, God, let me give you all the reasons in this I'm talking out loud. I know my kids thought I had lost my mind. Let me give you all the reasons I will never homeschool. And for 20 minutes, I blasted God's eardrum with all my great reasons never to do this. But out of a courtesy to my friend, I read the book. And doggone if it didn't change my life again. And so sometimes God puts us in situations like I found myself in high school, where he calls you to stand and you didn't see it coming. Every once in a while, he totally shifts and changes your life's direction in a way you never saw coming. I never saw this coming. And so I argued with God fairly vociferously. I have to say that God will entertain our arguments, but he doesn't ask permission when he wants to invade our life with a new thought. I don't know if you've learned that yet, but I'm sure he didn't ask Paul, hey, Paul, do you mind if I knock you off that horse and blind you for a few days? And he certainly didn't ask me if I was really excited about being a homeschool mom in 1984 when nobody else in the world had ever heard of it either. Talk about no community. So through a crazy series of events, the school district told me I could hold Ty back. Then they changed their mind and said I couldn't hold Ty back. I went to the associate superintendent, who had been my principal in high school. We were good friends. Said, Zan, you can't hold Ty back. I said, you guys do this all the time. But it was, I think, God hardening their heart, because he had told me, you will homeschool these boys, Zan Tyler. And I said, no, thank you, God. And so God got the order of command straight the day that I realized we were going to homeschool. And so the associate superintendent had said, Zan, the district's getting lenient with this kind of thing, which meant they had approved one person for 1 year to homeschool, and she was a certified teacher. Well, it was so normal in my school district when I called the local school district, and then the State Department of Education, nobody would tell me what the law was. Now, these are the days, if you can imagine, no internet, no smartphone, no laptops, no nothing, no LexisNexis. So when you want information, you've got to go to the source. So we finally hired an attorney to find out what the homeschooling law was. I filled out an application. It felt like a master's thesis. They wanted so much from me, a couple inches thick. And the school board turned me down, although I had complied with the letter of the law. And so I woke up one morning and realized there really is a problem here that I didn't know what to do about. To compound things, Joe and I lived a half a mile from his parents, 3 miles from my parents, and we had told nobody in the world we were planning to homeschool. Joe said, at some point they're going to realize the kids aren't getting on the school bus. I said, yeah, I think I'll cross that bridge when I get to it. It was a little bit of a cowardly response, but it kept my sanity. Okay, so I woke up one morning and thought, I have to do something, Lord. What am I going to do? Then I realized, okay, I've got to appeal. My attorney hired an attorney again. I had to appeal to the State Board of Education. Well, the man who was superintendent of education had been a friend of my mother's in the context of the fact that when he got his PhD, he visited her and observed her classroom. So every day in the 4th grade, I'd go across the hall to my mother's room and talk to Dr. Williams. So I called him up and I said, Dr. Williams, I said, are you busy? I've got a problem. I'm Zan Tyler. I'm Sybil Peters' daughter. He says, oh, honey, can you come up now? I'll clear my schedule. I thought, hallelujah. So I'm thinking how I'm going to tell him the events. And so I'm going in expecting him to say to me, you are a mother who loves your child. You've done your due diligence. In legal terms, you've exhausted your administrative possibilities. And what can I do to help? So I get there and I hug Dr. Williams and I tell him, thank you for seeing me, and I tell him my story. And he looks at me and he says, well, Zan, I'll have you put in jail for truancy if you continue down this path. And you could have blown me over with a feather. I had this quick remembrance of standing before those community leaders in school that day. And here God is calling me to take another stand. Only I've got the same deer in the headlights feeling. And I'm thinking, Lord, I don't even know what to say. I don't know what to do. I mean, I'm going to jail? And as I thought, these words came out of my mouth. Well, Dr. Williams, you will just have to put me in jail. And I remember thinking, is there a third person in this room? Because I'm fairly certain I would not have said that. And I'm looking around, and it was just the two of us. And then, that verse that says, again, when God calls us before the authorities, he gives us the words to say. What he doesn't tell us in that verse is we might not like the words he gives us to say, like, go ahead and put me in jail. So I realized that now I really have a major problem. And I kept thinking,
I couldn't go home. I had to go tell my parents. My hearing before the State Board of Education's in a week. My mom and dad are both very civically involved, and the newspaper wouldn't say peon homeschool mom Zan Tyler goes to jail. It would say John Peter's daughter goes to jail. So I thought, well, I better tell them before they read it in the newspaper. So I go see my parents, and I tell them, I'm homeschooling Ty. Richland District 2 has turned me down for no good reason. Charlie Williams just threatened to put me in jail, and my hearing is next week, and I didn't want you to read about it in the newspaper. And then I lose it. I'm a total, absolute wreck, and I leave. So my dad, bless his heart, my mom, my dad, and Joe were the only people who really stood beside me in these early days of homeschooling, and I will always love them for that. I can't say Joe was a proponent of homeschooling. When I talked to him about it the first time, he said, well, you can't mess up a kid too bad in K-5. So, okay. I thought, thank you for that rousing endorsement, but it was not a no. And he used to say, you know, Zan, for homeschool mom, think about jail. 3 hots and a cot. You're not cleaning, you're not cooking, you're not having to take care of kids, you're not teaching. You know, it might be a break. And so, so he was great at keeping me laughing through all of these threats. So my dad was pretty mad that I'd been treated that way. He didn't care a whit about homeschooling, but he was very angry. So he was chairman of the Baptist Hospital Board in Columbia, and happened to be speaking with a senator's wife the next night, and said, Zan's in trouble, and what's the senator going to do about it? Well, to back up to Girl State, when I was elected that year as governor, 1972, it was the first year of the 18-year-old vote in South Carolina. I'm not sure if that was nationwide or not. And so I spoke for this senator around the state and did commercials for him. And he said, remember, Zan did a lot for the senator as a young person. So the next day, we get a call from the senator's chief of staff. Don't worry about it. The senator has read through all the paperwork. He's going to overnight a letter to Charlie Williams. Well, then I get a call the next day. Zan, the senator's just going to go fly down and talk to Charlie Williams. So the senator flies down, walks in Charlie Williams' office, and says, get off her back. Her program's legal. You need to approve it. And so I start getting letters and calls that day. Zan, this is Miss So-and-so from the State Department of Education. Come on down, honey. We just want to make sure all your paperwork's in order. The chairman of this committee that was in charge of my hearing, curriculum committee, instructional materials, calls and says, Zan, I think you went to Furman with my son, Dolphus, and we'd love to meet you, so make sure you attend the hearing. Everything's fine. And so we avoided jail, but our life was a mess because God had not let go of the calling. What I didn't recognize is, I've got to keep an eye on this time, is how much my life would change. Now, I'm an extrovert, and all of a sudden I'm homeschooling, and people aren't speaking to me. I mean, this has been in the news. Friends in our very tight neighborhood, some of them wouldn't let their children play with our kids, and they'd already been close, always been close. Some people at church wouldn't speak to me. A lot of family members wouldn't speak to me. And it was really a hard time. That first year, we had a police car that just would routinely drive in our little quiet cul-de-sac neighborhood. I presumably make sure my kids were inside and we were doing schoolwork and my car was parked in the driveway. And so it was pretty much of a mess. I got a call in the middle of a mess from a woman named Lorraine Itterman. She was a PhD in education, had just come to Columbia Bible College in South Carolina to take over their elementary education program. She said, Zan, I've heard about you. I would just like to talk to you for a few minutes. So I met Lorraine for dinner. I thought, shoot, anybody who wants to see me now, I'm all in. I need a friend. And I felt like, oh, this is so melodramatic. I felt like John on the island of Patmos, who had been exiled for preaching the gospel. And here this was, but I said, God,
I said, I know this, Lord, I'm being overly dramatic, but he was the people-loving apostle, and you put him on this island by himself. I feel like this house has become my island. Are you hearing me? And it was like God whispered in my ear, Zan, look at the work I did in John's life on the island of Patmos. I gave the church one of its greatest gifts, the book of the Revelation of Jesus Christ. And I want you to hold on, because I'm going to do a great work in your life in exile, in your presumed exile. And so now that's just for free. So when I got this call from Dr. Itterman, I jumped all over it. And so she was a PhD, but she had been a missionary. She took me to this little cheap Italian restaurant and spent $10 on a meal. I felt like I was eating in a 5-star hotel. All that to say is, if you want to speak into somebody's life, it doesn't take a lot of time and it doesn't take a lot of money. But she looked me in the eye and she said, Zan, I want you to know this is bigger than you. This is bigger than you. God is going to take care of your family, because homeschooling, this is bigger. You can't see it now, but the Lord will reveal that to you. And that changed my life. That one little meal and 1 hour with her totally changed my life, because the Lord started giving me a vision for something he was going to do that was not just about me. It was bigger. There's a book called Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus by, I think, Karish Nabil. I might have his name wrong. And he was raised in a Muslim family, very close family. He became a Christian, and he was in med school. And so he took some days off from school just to go fast and pray in his hotel room. And he's weeping because of what he's lost. And he says, God, why is this so hard? And he said, it was like God said out loud to me, because it's not all about you. And as God is calling us to stand, as he's shifting our directions in life, as he's giving us community and taking community away and rebuilding it again, we have to remember, it's not about us. It's about our neighbors. It's about God getting glory in the process. So we did eventually build community. This is South Carolina, one of our many public hearings in South Carolina. It's a little blurry, but it shows you these were the people who weren't yet getting into the State House because the room was so full already. So from 1985 to 1992, we worked as a family and as a growing community on getting homeschooling legislation passed. In 1985, I had a knock on the door from a neighbor. It's late at night, scared me to death. I never knew if there's a knock late at night, I'm thinking it's DSS coming to take my kids, or it's a policeman coming to put me in jail. I was always waiting for the other shoe to drop, because although I'd stayed out of jail the first time, that was no guarantee of any safety. So a friend of ours comes in and he says, Zan, I hate homeschooling. You know that. I said, yes, I know that. And he said, but I love you. And sometimes you find community in strange places, and friends who are willing to stand with you when they disagree with you. And he said, he was the head of a state agency, and he said, in the state register, the State Department of Education has promulgated homeschooling regulations that will only allow you to homeschool if you have a college degree and you only use state-approved text, which means Christians could not use the Bible in their homes, in their homeschool. And so this was our rallying call. And so for 6 years, we fought against that. We had lots of losses in the legislature. I don't have time to go into it. We're building community, a family at a time. For a long time, it was me and Joe and my boys, who were 6 and 8 and 7 and 9, sitting around a table in the middle of the night at 2 o'clock, sending out a mailer that you had to lick a stamp and put in an envelope and type on a typewriter and go to the printer to have them printed out for everybody. And so for a little while, we were a community of about 5, our family. Lizzie wasn't born yet, so 4. And then the community begins to grow. We have the first public hearing on these regulations, and I have to call an attorney again. There's no homeschool legal defense yet. No community, no state organizations, none of that. Appreciate your community. And so I have to get 25 letters in. Now, here's the technology. I have to request a public hearing. 25 people have to do it with me to keep these regulations from becoming law. I type a letter and I tell people, I said, I need your letter to go to the State Department, but you've got to type me a carbon copy. Anybody know what carbon copy is? You put carbon paper between 2 pieces of paper, and you mail one to me, and you mail one to the state superintendent's designee. And so it's just this art. I mean, oh gosh, there's just some days I really love technology. There's some days it makes me so mad I want to scream. But if we had email then, it would have saved us hours and hours and hours of time. And so we send out this letter, and I'm praying for 25. We get 125. At this first public hearing, hundreds of people show up. It was amazing. And so God is building this community that I'm unaware of. And then homeschooling becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. And we kept losing. HSLDA comes in, they start filing lawsuits. We lost lawsuits. We were losing the public opinion battle. We were losing everything. It was like Narnia in South Carolina. It was always winter, but never Christmas. And so finally, in 1992, Joe and I started an organization in the private sector to allow parents with a high school degree to use any curriculum they wanted to when they homeschooled. We felt like we had legal basis. Homeschool Legal Defense came behind us. The private school people said, Zan, you've got 2 years, keep up with your test scores because your test scores will be great. And so we incorporated in July of 1990. In November of 1990, we had 11 of our families served with truancy subpoenas from the sheriff's department. And so that began a fight of our life, which we actually won in 1992. Mike Ferris won a big Supreme Court decision. And when that happened, the Attorney General, an attorney at the Attorney General's office, an attorney for the State Department of Education came and saw me, and they said, Zan, what do you want? We want to quit all the legislation. We had elected a new superintendent. They said, what do you want? So we got the SCAES law passed. Our organization was actually named in state law. And Mike Ferris said it was the only time that he knew of that a state legislature had given a private sector organization like our SCAES the power of equal to school districts in approving and monitoring homeschool programs. And so this is the governor signing our bill, and legislators and senators, my dad on the right, and some guys from our board. So by this time, we have a team, we have a community, and the Lord gave a great victory. So we're going to do this quick. If we do not hang together, we shall surely hang separately. Cherish your community. Harvard Rules and Precepts, here's what the founders said. Founders of 90% of our colleges. Let every student be plainly instructed and earnestly pressed to consider well. The main end of his life and studies is to know God in Jesus Christ, which is eternal life, and therefore lay Christ at the bottom as the only foundation of all sound knowledge and learning. And so this is what we were committed to as a community. Noah Webster in 1828 said, to give children a good education in manners, arts, and science is important. To give them a religious education is indispensable, and an immense responsibility rests on parents and guardians who neglect these duties. So by this time now, homeschooling is legal, it's growing, it's 1999. And I'm thinking, there's always going to be a cap to homeschooling, Lord. There are only so many people who can or will sacrifice that second income to stay at home and teach their kids. It's hard. It's a joy, but it's hard. And I thought, so what what will it take for people to continue to embrace homeschooling? So this is a quote attributed to C.S. Lewis: "Education without religion is useful as useful it seems, rather tends to make man a more clever devil." So our society is beginning to get a little more secular, a lot more secular, and out of control. And it's 1999, I remember it. It's in June because my second son's graduating from our homeschool high school. We're getting ready. We killed the fatted calf when our kids graduated, and we're getting ready, or I should say pig, because we were having 250 people over for barbecue. And the phone rings, and I think it's Joe's best friend pranking me. "Hey, Zan, this is so-and-so from the Today Show. We'd like to fly you up and do a special on homeschooling." I said, "Ha, ha, ha, I've got no time for this." Click. And so the phone rings again, and he says, "Okay, I'm not Hal, don't hang up." And so actually, it was the producer of the Today Show wanting to fly me up to do a piece on homeschooling. And so I said, "Really? Because if this is a hit piece, not interested." And he said, "No." And I said, "So why are you doing this?" He said, "Because of Columbine." Anybody remember Columbine? It was April 20th, 1999, the first school shooting, probably one of the worst. I mean, there's not such thing as a good school shooting. But it all of a sudden, they said, "We're getting calls from people who don't want to send their kids to school anymore." People who said they would never homeschool or homeschooling. So I'm just showing you this shot because it's a little bit of fun. Katie Kirk and I did this show on homeschooling on the Today Show. And really, she was very gracious. It was because Joe made me watch the Today Show for 6 weeks leading up to it, so I would know how to answer the questions. And but we had a delightful time. And I'm thinking, okay, Lord, homeschooling is continuing to grow. The other thing that happened along the way is the technology revolution. Now, all of a sudden, people can stay at home and work. I started after my second son graduated and I had one left. I was working for an internet company, Christianity.com, and then a publisher, Broadman and Holman. From home, we called it telecommuting. And not many people did it then, but I had one of those few jobs, and it was growing. And so as we wrap up, I want to share one thing that Elizabeth Smith taught me. And I want to leave this with you as we talk about community and as I pass this baton to you, as my generation passes this baton to you. Elizabeth Smith was the wife of Mike Smith, who is the president of Homeschool Legal Defense Association. And she called me one day in the early 2000s, and she said, "Zan, fly up to Virginia and study with me for a few days." I said, "Elizabeth, I can't do that." So it turns out Lizzie was going to a camp, my daughter, at Patrick Henry College. I said, "Okay, well, I'll come spend a few days while Lizzie's there." She said, "Come spend the week." I said, "Okay." She said, "I want to talk to you about homeschooling being a revival movement." And I said, "Elizabeth, we all want to believe wherever we are, God's involved in this revival movement." And I said, "But I got no eyes to see what you're telling me." And she said, "Well, you're wrong. Come see me." And so she gave me all these books on revival and magazines on the history of revival. She said, "Zan, homeschooling is a revival movement, and God is going to use it in bigger and bigger ways." And I said, "Okay, Elizabeth." So I go home. We have a pastor at church that next week. And he is a world-renowned scholar on the revivals throughout the world, PhD, and Vice President of Evangelism Explosion International. He's traveled the world for Christ, and he's studied. And so he came to dinner at our house. I said, "Dr. Parrish, do you think homeschooling is a revival movement?" And he said, "Well, Zan, what was the Puritan revival verse?" I didn't know. He said, "He will turn the hearts of the fathers to the children and the hearts of the children to their fathers." And because homeschooling is doing that, it is absolutely a revival movement. It took me back to that stadium in 1972 where there are 80,000 Christians. And I think, Lord, will I ever see anything else like that in my life? And now there are millions and millions and millions of people homeschooling. If you had told me that in 1984, I would have told you, you lost your marbles. The only thing people give homeschooling moms is a hard time. And so what I want to say in these last 5 minutes as we finish up
is that community is at its best when it supports each other, when it's got that common mission and goal. Joe and I started 2 homeschooling organizations, one at the state level to support homeschooling moms and a co-op in the 1990s to help homeschooling moms with the load. I am all about support. But community reaches its apex when you work together to help other people, to rescue those around you. And so it was interesting. Joe and I were speaking at a retreat, a leadership retreat in Connecticut. So we took a day to go see Mystic Seaport. And there was this little light tender there, this little boat that you see right there, the Gerda 3. And it was on loan from the Holocaust Museum. And I said, what is this doing here? And I started talking to the docent, and he said, oh, this is an amazing story. A professor from the States went over to Denmark and interviewed all these people. Both of our dads are World War II vets. And so here's the story. When Hitler gets to Denmark, the Danes get together as a country and they decide they're not killing our citizens who are Jewish. They can't have them. Now, how did I never know this story? So they all get together. And this is the Gerda 3, owned by Henny. There's a book called Henny and Her Boat. And she was female. And she started all of the captains of all the vessels and the owners of these little boats, lighthouse tender boats. They start ferrying all the Jews out of Denmark, across the ford, getting them wherever they could get them out of the city, out of their country, because they had intel that the Nazis were coming. Well, the Nazis got hold of this scheme and they had to stop. So the Danes didn't quit there. They started hosting huge funerals for, quote, dead Jews that weren't really dead. And it was a way to and they would host them in the biggest hospitals. They would get all the Jews there. And while they're there, they're taking them up one at a time, giving them new names, a diagnosis with a chart, and putting them in a hospital bed. So when the Nazis come to see them, they think they're Danish people in the hospital. Here's their names, here's their diagnosis. And the ones that, when they run out of hospital beds, they start hiding them in their attics, and nurses start taking them to their apartments. To make a long story short, somewhere between only 300 and 600 of the Jewish population in Denmark lost their lives in concentration camps. And I think there were like 6,000 in all. So you would think this is the end of the story, but it's not. So at the end of the war, these people come back, who have been exiled, come back to Denmark. Well, they expect their houses to be gone and their businesses to be gone. The Danish people had kept up their businesses and their homes, and these people walked into their lives, not like they had never left them, but with a full appreciation of what their neighbors had done for them. They rescued them. And I want to say, what a testimony. And so I feel like now in the homeschooling community with COVID, our job has been to rescue people. The homeschooling community has worked best in this rescue mission because it's no longer about us. It's about our neighbors and the glory of God. And so a revival is important because there are a lot of things that happen. Resources are developed. People, resources are developed, research is done, all of these things that makes it credible, and infrastructure was built. We have state organizations, we have co-ops, we have curriculum companies. It's really amazing. If COVID had happened in 1985, I don't know what this country would have done. But in 2020, we were ready. And we have been, in Florida alone, from 2020 to 2023, the homeschooling population increased by 46%, 155,000 people in Florida. And I think we have like I don't know the numbers. I heard 16 million the other day. I'm sorry, I didn't research that. But so here is another revival. Only this revival, you couldn't begin to hold it in the cotton bowl. It is this
Holy Spirit revival and all the things that I thought would put a dead end to homeschooling and parents teaching their children and discipling them at home, God has bowled over and made the ministry bigger and bigger and bigger. So I just want to say to you, take that baton, love your community, find the community. Your community may be you right now, like it was where I found myself. And I have to say, God built the homeschooling community. I did not. I can take no credit for that. Pray for God to build a community and then intentionally work in your community. And don't stop until you have a vision together that has an eternal purpose and is rescuing those in need around you. I just want to thank you. Our time is so short. You never know when God is going to call you to stand. You know He will give you the words and He will give you the faith. I'm living testimony to that because I'm just this little squirt peon that the Lord used in a small way. Don't feel like you have to change the world. Answer the calling God has given you. God is giving you a calling that He gives no one else for your corner of life, for my little corner of life. And I just want to remind you that God is a big God. You call to Him, He will answer you with things in which you know not. And I just want to remind you in closing, do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will hold on to you with my righteous, victorious right hand. It's been such a glory for me to be with you, to watch y'all sing and worship the Lord in these worship sessions and last night by the fire. Thank you for being faithful to Christ. Thank you for being faithful to each other. Now, go out and do that for the next 60 years. Thank you.